Okay, we're recording. All right, welcome everybody. This is the WWBA West Washington Business Association Educational Seminar. Today we're lucky enough to have Mandy and Yolanda from CMYK Printing. They're going to tell us what we need to do before we bring our print stuff to them so that they give us high quality printing. So if you have any questions, please just type them in the questions box. And Mandy or Yolanda will answer those at the end of the presentation. So with that, you guys, go ahead. You're on.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Mandy and I are here to help you ease your mind when you go to the printing company. So what should you know before you go to print? Here we go.
So these are the basics that we're going to try to cover if we have enough time. Some of them we're going to be doing very briefly, like the design principles. Design, we could take a whole course in teaching design, so we're just going to touch on some major issues that we come across, questions that people have. The section we're going to spend the most amount of time would be the outputting print-ready files, because that is where you're going to need to know the most. And then briefly we'll go at the end over different type of printing and paperweight, which tends to generate a lot of confusion, like the difference between cover and text and the pounds and all that stuff. So just to go into really quickly some design issues, fonts and typefaces. The terms have become fairly interchangeable over the years. There is a subtle difference between a typeface and a font, though. A typeface is a set of one or more fonts that share common design features. So, for example, typefaces, Helvetica, Times New Roman, Calibri. There's thousands of typefaces out there. They all do something different. So a font is a specific set of letter characters that are all in the same style of typeface. So we have the typeface Helvetica, but within Helvetica we have Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Thin, Italic, Helvetica Condensed Bold. These are all individual fonts that belong to the typeface Helvetica. Some good ideas, or bad ideas, I guess, too, for when you're using fonts. One, you don't want to use too many fonts in your design. The general rule is 2 to 3 typefaces. Within a typeface, though, say, for example, you choose Helvetica, which is one of the most common ones. Helvetica has so many different versions of the font, condensed, bold, extended. You can use all those different fonts within the typeface, but try to stick to 2 to 3 typefaces in your design. You can see the disaster that is using too many typefaces on the right here. Number 2, contrast with your background.
That's a big one.
Yes. You spend all this time thinking about what you want to say. You want to make sure that it's easy to read. You want to make sure your colors aren't clashing. There's enough contrast between the background color to make it legible. Black and yellows tend to be good. Lights and darks. Red on black is usually not a good idea. You also want to think about, there's a large portion of the population that is colorblind, and certain colors they will not be able to see if you put them next to each other, like greens and reds. You want to kind of separate them a bit. Third, you want to know your audience.
Yes, that's a big one.
Yes. You don't want to make, on the right here we have an example, Harley Davidson Riding Club, Big Al. You can see the font choice here does not exactly represent the company.
No, it does not.
Yeah.
I think they'd be a little upset.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. So that's fonts and typefaces in brief. Colors.
Yes, colors are the big one.
Yeah. You like fonts, you want to stick to a limited color palette. You don't want to use every color under the sun. It gets confusing.
Or too many.
Yeah. You can see on the right, you've got way too many colors in here. It's a little jarring. That being said, if the effect you want is to jar people, then
that would be it.
That would be it. Typically, you don't want to do that, though, especially if you're advertising your business. Color wheel. It's not just something you used in kindergarten. It is important. Certain colors just work better together. You have on the right here different ideas of color grouping. Monochromatic looks good together. Analogous, which is all colors in the same color family. Like, for example, here it's all warm colors. Then you have the complementary colors, which are opposite each other on the color wheel. And then you have even further versions of breaking up that color wheel. And then lastly, in color theory,
basic rules of choosing colors.
Yes, colors can have psychological effects. So if you are trying to advertise something calming, you don't want to use reds, yellows, stuff like that, which signal danger and can be, a little scary. You want something more calm, like blues. This isn't just guesswork. There's an actual science behind color theory. So if you can usually take a few minutes to do a little research and figure out what colors work best. So for example, these are fast food logos.
Yes, and you notice a lot of red.
Yeah. There is a trend here. It's not a coincidence. These colors encourage you to buy more food.
Yes, they do.
So that is why you see these colors a lot. So what's next?
The next one is going to be file format.
Actually, I think we're doing vector and raster next. Yes.
Yes.
So now we're going to get into actual file stuff. And I am going to switch what screen we're looking at. A lot of times we get artwork, or you'll hear from your printer, is it vector format? And not a lot of people know exactly what vector format is. The basic difference between vector and raster is raster artwork is pixel based. It's based on dots on the screen or on the print. Vector format is mathematical based and can be sized infinitely, whereas raster has a limited sizability. Right here on the screen, we have our logo. The top one is vector format. The bottom one is raster format. Currently, there's not a lot of noticeable difference. But if we zoom in, you'll see, so I'm zoomed in now at 800%, or actually 1200%. So this is taking that little image and blowing it way up. And you'll see that the lines are crisp, they're clean,
Sharp.
they're sharp, they look good. They're going to look good if I print it at 1 inch. They're going to look good if I print it at 100 inches. They're going to look good if I print it at 100 feet. Inversely, if I go down to where the raster image is, you can see it's losing that crispness.
Yeah.
You can actually see where the pixels are. If you go in even further, it gets even worse.
Mandy's thinking of food already.
Yes. So raster images have a limited sizability. I can go smaller and the image will still look good. But if I go larger, you start to see those pixels and it's not going to work. So for example, this image is, I'm not sure how big it is. I think it's like 5 inches wide.
Right.
So it's going to look best printed at 5 inches wide. If I try to print it at 5 feet wide, it's going to look terrible.
Like when people bring us in pictures from their camera.
Yes. So
There are many times that we stand there, we're like, they want to do like a big canvas print and we can't because they don't understand why, and this is the reason why.
Yeah, and I'm going to switch actually over to Photoshop now and look at a photo.
There you go.
So this is an example of a photo that we might receive where somebody took it on their phone, they love it, and they're like, I want that printed really big and on my wall. Looking at the screen, on the screen, it looks beautiful and clear. One thing to note is we're looking at it 32% right now.
Mm-hmm.
you always want to try and look at 100% to see what the quality is.
Yes. It still looks good.
It looks good now,
Right.
but just to show the pixels, if I
Right.
zoom in, keep
Ooh.
zooming in.
Yep. Then
See, now you see the individual pixels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each pixel is its own color.
Mm-hmm.
When you're really close and just looking at the color, you don't see anything. It's just some color squares. But when you start to zoom out, those colors start to form an image.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
The idea when you're making artwork is you don't want to see the pixels, you just want to see the art. So I'm gonna go, I think, right into, I think I'm gonna go jump into resolution since we're talking about,
Okay, what's resolution here?
there's no slide for it.
Oh, no.
Since we're talking about raster and pixel right now, let's talk about resolution, which is your DPI.
Mm-hmm.
DPI can be a little confusing. This image, and a lot of times when you find images, you can see the pixel ratio. This image is 2800 pixels wide, which means from the left to the right, there's 2800 pixels that make this image. Top to bottom, there's 1867. Right now, we have the resolution set to 300 pixels per inch or dots per inch, which is your DPI. Printing, we generally print at 300 DPI. That's going to give you the best printed image. Yes. Mm-hmm. A lot of images that we get will come to us at 72 DPI,
right,
which is fantastic for web,
mm-hmm.
for being online, for on the web, on the computer screen.
Right. Facebook,
yeah. Instagram, anything online, your website. Yes. 72 is fine. Print, you want to print at 300. If you print at 72, you're going to start seeing those pixels again, and it's going to take away from your image. One way to tell if you have enough DPI, this is kind of a trick, and I'm going to see if I can get into my folder here. So this is the folder that I have set up for this webinar that has the files that I need. This is the photo that we're looking at right here, the group photo. Right. You can see the dimensions here. A lot of times when you're finding images online, you'll be able to see this.
Right, how big it is.
This dimension.
Large. Mm-hmm.
So we know that it's 2800 pixels across. Mm-hmm. We want to print it at 300 DPI. So how do we know how big we can print this image before it starts going below 300 DPI or looking bad? You can, I don't know if I have a calculator on screen. Basically, if this is how many pixels are across the screen and we want to print it at 300 DPI, take that 2800, divide it by 300, mm-hmm. and you will get 9.33 repeating inches. So that's the maximum size that you can print this picture without starting to lose quality. You know, so it's,
to know that.
Yeah, it's not going to make it to,
mm-hmm.
In other words, you're not going to be able to print this at 36 inches
right.
by 24 inches.
Or, yeah.
And
11 by 17?
You can, but it's going to not, you're still going to be degrading the image a little bit.
Right.
You can sometimes fudge that. Mm-hmm. You can sometimes get away with 150 DPI.
Right.
Which in that case, you just take that 2800 here and divide it by 150.
Right.
And that tells you that you can get it at 18 inches across.
Well, there you go.
Right now I'm in Photoshop. Photoshop's really handy because it shows me the pixels. I can simply just go over to inches and there's how wide it is.
Perfect.
I can change the resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Photoshop does not enjoy right now. So it's 150. But just as an example, let's go back to 300 and say we're going to print it at 36 inches at 300 DPI. I'm just going to show this as an example. So Photoshop is resizing it. Now, we didn't have enough dots per inch to really make this work. So we'll see what it does. It's going to take a minute. Okay. Oh. And that might take a while. I'm trying to think of what else to talk about without resolution. So our print resolution is 300. Yeah, vector artwork is going to come across, again, it's mathematical, so vector artwork doesn't have a DPI assigned to it because it's going to stretch or scale to anything.
So just to kind of give you a heads up, you always want to have the type of file that the client whatever you created it in, number one. That is very important, because if Mandy or whoever you're bringing it to, the designer, needs to make some adjustments, they can. So that's a very important feature.
So I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to switch back to Illustrator.
Yeah.
So I'm switching back to Illustrator now. Again, here we have the raster and vector logos. So while that other thing's transferring, I'm going to talk about your color space.
Hey, Mandy.
Yes.
While you're switching, you have a question that Christine asked. Is you're saying raster, and she wants to know if you're talking about PDFs or JPEGs or what?
That's a good question. I actually have a slide later in the presentation that talks about what file formats are what.
Oh.
I can jump to that now, though. That's
well, no. I was seeing the pause, so I thought I'd get that.
Yeah,
question.
no, it's good. Let me jump down to that file formats.
Right there.
So, file formats. The first column here shows, what formats as a printer we want from you. These are going to be your highest resolution and highest quality ones. The number one that we'll always request is a PDF. PDF can hold raster and vector, can hold text, it can hold everything all in the same file. EPS is basically just another PDF, really. It's an encapsulated PostScript. It has all the same information as a PDF does, and it's pretty interchangeable. A JPEG is a flattened image. JPEGs are always going to be raster. You cannot store vector information in a JPEG. We don't typically ask for JPEGs for printing, but we can use them. The catch is you have to have it saved at 300 DPI, and it has to be saved at the print size. So if you're printing a 24 by 36 poster, the JPEG needs to be sized 24 by 36 at 300 DPI. You can't give me an 8.5 by 11 at 300 DPI and expect it to blow up to that size for the same reason that we were talking about with the DPI before. Yeah. A TIFF is also a high-res file that you can give us. It can contain layers, but it won't be vector. It will always be raster. So this next column, raster file formats. These formats are always going to be raster. JPEG, a GIF, a PNG, a TIFF, and a bitmap. Those are all based off of pixel data. So they have a finite scalability. Yeah, you can only size them up so much. They're incapable of storing vector artwork. Right. Vector file formats are typically going to be an EPS, an AI, an SVG, and a PDF. Now, just because you have an EPS or an AI or a PDF does not guarantee that it is vector. because you can also store raster information in it. The only way to truly know if it's vector is to get it in its native software and open it up and see what you have, or to try and scale it. If it scales good, then you know you have vector. But oftentimes, and what we run into a lot, is we'll have a client that has paid somebody to create a beautiful vector logo for them. When you get that vector logo from your designer, keep that file safe somewhere, because the file that you upload to Facebook for your Facebook profile is not vector. And if you go to another designer and they ask you for your logo and you give them that image off of Facebook, either it's going to look really bad getting blown up, or you're going to pay extra charges to have the new designer basically recreate a vector version of your file. A fair amount of what I do regularly is recreate people's logos.
Yeah.
It's a large portion of that.
And it's so sad because they pay for it, you know?
Yeah, you paid good money to have this beautiful file created. Use it.
Exactly.
So I hope that answers the
So let me
format.
just interject one thing. So what you can do is, like Mandy does here, she'll save, she'll give the client the vector file, but then she'll save it as a JPEG for them. So if they wanted to, they can use it for Facebook, Instagram, wherever they want to use it. So they have a lower res.
Yeah.
So, right?
Yeah, a good designer is going to give you multiple formats for your file. They're not just going to drop an Illustrator file on you and expect you to know what to do with it. They're going to give you the JPEG. They're going to give you the vector EPS, probably a PDF version of it.
Right.
Most likely they'll give you a PNG. The difference between PNG and JPEG on the raster side is that PNG can contain transparency. JPEG cannot. Right. So if you're putting that image up on your logo up on your website and you need it to have a transparent background, you want a PNG. But yeah, any good artist is going to give you all of those. And you want to put them somewhere safe and don't lose them.
And ask for them.
Yes.
You're
if
paying
you don't get
for
them,
it.
yeah, you
ask for them.
Absolutely.
So we went through that one. Now we're going to be doing print, paper, and finishes.
Well,
or did you want to just finish up that one?
Well, we still have to do color space.
Okay.
So let me go back to I don't know if Photoshop is done. No. All right, so I'm going to switch back to Illustrator and talk about color space. There's several different types of color space. And what I mean by color space is the basic colors that create the overall color of your document. The most common color spaces that you'll hear are RGB and CMYK.
What is that?
Yes. So RGB stands for red, green, blue. That means that you're basically using the dots, the color information, red, green, blue, combined to make all your other colors. Correct. Red, green, blue, or RGB, is used primarily in online design, web design, for on your screen, because your screens display red, green, blue color information. Right. Printing, we use 4-color CMYK, which stands for cyan, which we have here, cyan, magenta, yellow, and then the K stands for black. It can't be CMYB because B stands for blue in RGB. That's why the K is for black. Printing, we're always using CMYK. There are differences between the two. RGB, because it's on a screen, is going to appear more vibrant and bright. CMYK tends to be a little duller.
Yeah, more subdued.
Yeah, it's a little more subdued. Converting images from RGB to CMYK, you're going to notice a difference. So a common thing that we have is people will design their files in RGB, They'll save their images in RGB. They like the way it looks on the screen, and then they'll hand it over to us, and we have to convert it to CMYK, and the printer will do that as well. And you get unexpected results with what you're seeing come out.
Especially the color.
Yeah, the colors are going to be different.
And they wonder why.
Yeah.
It's a color different.
Yeah, it's because it's a different
Two different applications.
color mix. You're mixing the colors differently. They're printing differently.
Exactly.
If we print RGB on the printer, it will tend to come out looking more red than what it looks like on the screen.
That's right.
And then also, it's not going to appear as bright. I've had several people ask me how to print neon orange.
Yeah.
It's very difficult in CMYK because the colors just don't mix that way. Another common color space that people use are Pantone colors. Pantone is a company that specifically creates color mixes.
Like color, color chart.
It's in an effort to standardize colors across the board for people. We can use Pantone colors. You can give me a Pantone color. I'm going to always convert that to CMYK though.
Right. Because
that's what our printers are reading. Some printers can do straight Pantone colors. We don't. But talk with your printer and find out what they would prefer and what would work best for them.
Yes. And if you have a specific logo with that you want to match, like let's say a red, that's you need to have those Pantone colors because otherwise we're never going to be able to match it. Yeah. We'll get it as best as we can on our end.
And different printer, the colors are tough because there's so many variables that go into it. If you have a very specific shade of a color, you may be going back and forth with your printer to get it just right. Because what paper you print it on, what equipment it's printed on, all these things factor in and can change the look of your color. So if you're using a gloss paper versus a matte paper, it's going to change the look of the color. So you may have to do some experimenting if you have a very specific color you need to get.
Very good point, Mandy.
So the next thing I want to go over when you're getting ready to send files to your printer is converting fonts to outlines. What the heck does that mean?
Yeah,
so
what does that mean?
So if we look at the vector version of our logo here, we have the font here, the text that is an editable text. So I can get in and select it and I can change it very easily. And it's editable. It is still in its text form. When you're sending to a printer, you want to convert that text to outlines. Basically, you're taking this text and you're making a vector object out of it. So I'm in Illustrator. I'm just going to go up to type and create outlines. Now, depending on what software you use, it's going to be a completely different way to do it. But what you're looking for is when I hit create outlines, this text is now like geometry. I can get in here and grab a point and edit it. Sometimes you want to edit it because you can customize your fonts a little bit. Most of the time you typically don't. But I can edit it. What I can't do is take my text tool and change this text anymore. So when you're getting ready to send the file out, you want to save a copy because if you want to go back and edit your text later, once you create outlines, you can't do that easily. You'd have to retype everything. Why do we do this?
Yes, why?
Basically, a font the font itself is the information that shapes the letters. If you have a very specific font and you send your file to your printer or anybody else and they do not have that font installed on their computer, the computer will try and substitute a different font, which is going to change the way your image looks. You will have all kinds of funky things happen, and what you get back may not be what you were expecting. We convert the font to outlines because then it's a an object.
Mm.
You don't need the font files. You don't need any of that. It's just geometry. It'll print exactly the way you want it to. So that's that.
That's good. That's very well put. Very, very informative. Good job,
So
Mandy.
the next thing, this is one of the biggest things we have an issue with. Bleeds.
Oh my God. Let's talk about bleeds.
Bleeds.
What is bleeds, Mandy?
Bleeds, safety
Woo.
margins, and the
This is
cut
a big one.
size. I am going to.
Hey, you can show my new. Oh, okay. You got that?
I just pulled something. Yeah. Well, I did. There's a reason I picked this one, but
Okay.
and not that. So, share the screen. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in InDesign here. InDesign is typically what we use to do layout. All of the Adobe programs can be used kind of interchangeably, but some programs work better for different things. This is a poster that we created for somebody. Now I'm going to zoom in here on the corner just so that we can see. I've got 3 different lines here. I have a red line out here, which is my bleed line. I have this black line, which is my cut line. And then this pinky purpley line here is my safety margin. So what does all that mean? When we print something, if you have color that goes to the edge of the paper. So right now, all we're seeing is the cut line. I want to point at it.
Yes.
So here we have this background color that runs all the way to the edge of the document. That means you're not going to have any white on the paper around that edge.
Mm-hmm.
That, we refer to that as the document bleeds. So if your printer asks you, does it bleed? This is what they're referring to. Does the ink go all the way to the edge?
Mm-hmm.
In order to print it with that effect, we have to print more than what you're going to get on the final cut. So typically we print 1/8 of an inch more, which is where this red line comes in. So this poster I think was 12 by 18, but say you're doing an 8.5 by 11 flyer. We can't, if it bleeds, we don't print on 8.5 by 11. We will actually print on a larger sheet of paper to get that extra color, and then we cut the paper down after printing
To 8.5.
to 8.5 by 11.
Right.
So in order to make sure we're getting that color, we add 1/8 of an inch to the outside of the cut size. And that's 1/8 of an inch on every side. So if you're building a program that doesn't let you set bleeds, and you need an 8.5 by 11 inch document, but you want it to bleed, you're actually going to build it at 8.75 by 11.25. That extra 1/4 of an inch gives you 1/8 of an inch on every side.
Very well put.
So anything that runs off the edge of the page needs to go out to this bleed line. Needs to go out to that line. Background art, colors, photos, stuff that's going to run off the page goes all the way out to this line. The black line is literally the cut line, so that's where we're going to cut the document.
Yeah, you don't want to cut off any verbiage or any pictures or someone head off or something. So
Which
definitely, which has happened.
Yes. And that is actually a good lead into why we use safety margins.
Exactly.
So over here on this edge, we can see we've got some text, but it's getting awfully close to the edge. The red line is the bleed. We definitely don't want text out here because everything on this side of the black line is going to be cut off.
Right.
Now, we don't cut by hand typically. We use a machine to cut. Sometimes things may slide off a little bit. That's why we use the safety margins. So any important text, any important images, any important logos need to be within this pink and purple line. This is the safety margin. Just like the bleed, it's 1/8 of an inch from the cut line, but on the inside of the document. So if I have the text right here, right now invites is really close to the edge.
Right.
It's probably safe. But education, the N is it's halfway over. So if the cut slides off a little bit, you risk cutting that off. That's why you want to keep everything inside.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to the 8.5 by 11 document,
Mm-hmm.
the bleeds are going to make it 8 3/4 by 11 1/4. The safety margins need to be a quarter, makes the document a 1/4 inch smaller.
Right.
So the safety margins need to be 1/8 inch on each side from here.
Okay.
So if you're making your own margins, it would be 8 1/4 inch by 10 3/4, because that's a 1/4 inch smaller.
Okay. So let me ask you a question, Mandy. So if I wanted to do something myself, is there a way I can find a template online?
Yes, there should be plenty of templates for bleeds. It can be a little confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I know as a designer, and I've been doing graphic design for 20 years, initially trying to figure out bleed is kind of a mind-bending puzzle.
Right.
And you will run into a lot of designers that still don't quite get it.
Okay.
When you work with people that are more web-based designers, they don't quite, they're not used to this. So they might need, you might have to walk your designer through it sometimes too.
Okay.
But if you send a file to a printer that's supposed to bleed and it doesn't have the bleed,
they should let you know.
Yeah, they definitely should let you know. Also, if it's something easy, the printer may add the bleed for you. But if you have a lot of complicated artwork, that's going to be really hard for them, and you'll probably incur extra fees.
Right.
Typically, they want to help you out if they can, but some printers will slap that on you right away.
Oh yeah.
We don't, but anyway.
We try to help.
Yes, we try to help. So that is bleed safety margins.
Now file format.
Yeah. Now we're going to go back to the spreadsheet or the PDF.
The PDF.
So I'm going to go back here. So we went over the file formats. Next, we're going to go into one more. Yeah.
Oh, one more. Okay.
Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about, and a lot of this we're going to go through pretty quickly.
Yes.
Different types of printers.
Yes.
What do we mean when we say small format and large format? Small format printers are typically the kind of printers that you'll see in an office, in your home. Pretty much every print shop is going to have a small format printer. Small format means literally smaller cut size sheets of paper. I think the largest size that we print cut sheet is just over 13 by 19 inches. For us, anything over that switches over into large format. Large format printers are generally printing from a roll of paper, not individual sheets. You can load cut sheets into large format printers, but typically you're using rolls, very large rolls.
Right.
Rolls can come in so many different sizes, from 18 inches wide up to 100 inches wide, and then some. Printers that can print over 100 inches wide are usually called like super wide or grand format. It's like a whole nother category.
That's totally different.
Yeah. So what kind of printing would you be doing with large format? Banners, posters, trade show graphics, wallpapers, blueprints, construction plans, decals,
magnets.
Any type of material that comes on a roll is typically going to be printed on a large format machine. Signs, backdrops, all that kind of stuff.
Yard signs too.
Yes, exactly. Basically anything larger than your 13 by 19 is probably going to be printed on a larger format machine.
So let's go to printers. Type of printers and finishes.
So digital printing versus offset printing.
Yeah, what is the difference on that?
It has to do with how the printer lays the ink.
Okay.
Digital printing is literally reproducing a digital image onto a physical surface. When you talk to somebody about having an inkjet printer or a laser printer, that is all digital printing. With that, every every impression or every print can be different. So if you're doing a run of 500 of something, it's possible that there will be variations between the different prints.
Okay.
Offset printing is different, where it's printed more on a plate and then spun through, and each color is laid individually that way. Though offset printers tend to be rather large, so they're harder to find out in the wild, but they do exist. And
that's more for big runs, right?
Yeah, typically you're printing large run stuff on offset printing.
Right.
So let's go on. So now going into digital printing, what's the difference between inkjet and laser printing?
Laser. That's a big one.
Yeah. You don't really think about it, but it is a completely different type of printing. Inkjet, as you can imagine, is basically a little jet is spraying out ink onto the paper. And it's printing, you know, basically pixels or dots, tiny dots. It sprays it out, just little tiny dots, a bunch of dots create the image.
Right.
So with inkjet, the type of paper you use can play a big role because the ink is a liquid ink. If you have low quality paper that absorbs liquid really easily, that ink is going to hit the paper and kind of spread out. And if you have a blurry or a feathery kind of look, that's probably why the paper's not meant for inkjet.
Right.
Smoother papers will create sharper images because it doesn't soak into the paper and it dries right on the surface. Inkjet printing does require a dry time. The ink has to dry, so you don't want to be touching it all over the place as soon as it comes out. Most of them dry pretty quick, but on some of the larger format stuff, you have to be careful. You don't want to start pushing the ink around.
And you always want to check the settings too. There's probably other ways of just lowering it too, so you don't have to saturate
you always
it.
want to make sure that with the inkjet, you're setting the right paper type while you're printing it. Because you might be setting it to print a photo, which is going to lay a lot of ink down.
Right.
And you're using a matte text paper that's going to just absorb all that and look terrible.
Right.
So laser printing. The biggest difference between laser and inkjet is inkjet is a liquid ink. Laser printer, it uses toner, which is basically a powder. The toner is electrically charged, and it's fused to the paper using the lasers and heat.
Right.
The example here that I have is if you have a paint roller that has like a texture or template on it, and you dip that in paint and then you spread that on the wall, what's going to stick to the wall is the pattern that's on there and not the divots. The difference with the inkjet is that it's not a paint roller, it's electric drum. It looks a lot like a thick rolling pin. Uses electrical charges to draw the toner to the drum, and then rolls the paper through, fuses it with heat to the paper, and that is what creates your image. It's kind of a really neat thing.
It is neat. Wow, it's a great analogy. I like that.
It's a really neat thing.
That.
And one of the other major things with laser printing is and makes it very advantageous is it doesn't smudge, it doesn't blur, and it doesn't require any dry time. So when it comes out of the printer, it's ready to touch.
It's ready to go. Yes. Awesome. So paper types and weight.
Yes. This can be a whole class in its own.
Yes.
There's all different types of paper and paper weight. It's important to note that weight does not equal the thickness of the paper.
Right.
How the weight is calculated can be somewhat complicated, and you'll get different measurements too. You have the actual weight, which we refer to as the pounds, and then you have the GSM, which is literally the grams per square meter. I made a little, it's like the last one. Okay. I'm not going to go too much into describing this because it's a little complicated, but these are the different ways that you might be talking to your printer about what type of paper you want, either the weight, the GSM, or the points.
Right.
Points or mils is literally the thickness of the paper.
Right.
The weight is not. The weight
Mhm.
has to do with how the paper's cut, at what size, and there's no standard for it, and it gets very complicated.
But if you have a good printing company, they'll go
Talk to
through it,
your-
they'll talk to you
yes.
about it, and definitely let you know what's what and what you really need for your work.
Yeah.
So some people have, you know, cards, invites, and so forth, and there's a special paper, especially if you have a
Yeah.
lot of bleed, you know, a lot of color onto it. You know, we will recommend something
Yeah.
totally different, so that way it doesn't saturate, doesn't go through the paper
Yeah.
either.
Definitely talk to your printer. If
Exactly.
you have no idea what kind of paper you need to be using, talk to your printer.
Yes.
Tell them what you're doing with it,
Yes.
what you're envisioning, what you're hoping to get out of it, how much color is
Mhm.
being used, how much of the page is being covered,
Yes.
because that can all play a role into what paper you choose to pick.
Mhm.
Some of the basic terms that you'll hear a printer mention are bond paper, and it comes in all different weights.
Mhm.
Typically, your common copier paper is a bond paper. It's used a lot for letterhead and stationery, printing emails, just kind of everyday use. It can work well for anything that you have to mark up, because it takes ink, like pen ink and pencil, very easily, and it can be erased. And you can use it for, you know, it's a pretty affordable thing to use for temporary signs and stuff like that as well. Book paper can range from 30 pounds to 115 pounds. This includes, and you can have coated, uncoated. It's used commonly for books and booklets.
Right.
We can do a lot of stuff on like gloss book, which is like a magazine type paper. It's very kind of feels kind of like high class or high quality.
It has that great look to it.
Yeah,
too.
it adds
really nice.
It adds a lot of nice body to your print. Cover paper. A lot of times people ask us for cardstock or cover paper, and people are like, "What's the difference?" There's no difference.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah, cardstock and cover paper are the same thing. It's just, I guess, where you get the term from originally.
Yeah.
Cover paper or cardstock is a thick paper.
Right.
And it can range from 60 pounds up to 120 pounds. So it varies greatly.
Right.
Typically, we print on cover a lot of postcards, business cards, rat cards,
posters,
greeting cards, anything that you want to be a little firm. That it can take being handled and passed around quite easily.
Yes, which is good.
Yes.
So, do we have anybody that has questions for us?
We only had the one.
Okay, good. So we are going to go back to doing the paper.
I just have one more thing about papers. Okay. Index paper comes in 90, 110, 140 pounds. Commonly used for index cards. I mean, you can use it for tabs, dividers. It's great for sketchbooks.
Yes.
It's pretty common. Text paper is another really common thing that we print on.
We use that here a lot.
It ranges from 50. It goes all the way up to 100. It's most commonly, it's probably the most commonly used paper in printing.
Oh yeah.
Brochures, letterhead, stationery, flyers, trifolds. Typically, it's going to be on text paper.
Yep.
And those basic papers are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to papers. You can do linens, you can do felts. There's synthetic papers, scrim, which is typically a banner paper.
Right.
Basically, it just gets back down to talk to your printer.
Yeah,
about what you want.
Yeah, I mean, they should be able to help you with whatever your needs are. I mean, if you have a really good printing company, they basically will sit there with you and talk about what you're looking to get out of the information, the project that you're trying to do. So that's a good way of just knowing your information, getting all the information out of them. Like I said, a good printer will sit down and talk to you and see where you're going and how you're planning. Mandy does that a lot with our clients here, and this is one of the reasons why they love her, because she takes time out to actually listen to what they want and hear what they want.
It's important. You need to, I mean, we want our clients to succeed with what they want. We want you to have a product that you are proud of. We're proud of it for you as well.
Exactly.
Any questions that you have, we're happy to answer them. we weren't able to get into it in this presentation, but when it comes to paper, there's all kinds of other things that go into it, like if you want gloss or semi-gloss or matte, all of these finishes will give your paper a different feel.
Right.
If you want to be able to write on something, you don't want gloss because it will not let you write on it. You
Yes.
want something matte. You can do, there's different types of glosses. There's UV gloss. You can also do spot UV, which means only certain parts of the design will have the gloss.
Right. Like our business cards.
Yeah. You can add foiling to things. We can do rounded corners. There's so many different customizations that we can do. Just talk to us.
Yes.
Or talk to a printer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's about it.
I think that's it. I think we enjoyed our little time, and we want to thank you for being part of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions,
Thank you.
please.
Good. Thanks, Yolanda, Mandy. And because I didn't do you justice when we introduction, Yolanda and her husband Bill are the owners of CMYK, and Mandy, who is the graphic artist, allows us to bring our crap in, and she makes wonderful masterpieces out of it. So with that, I want to thank you two for a great presentation. I learned a lot. I didn't realize that there was so much involved in just getting a little piece of paper printed. So
Oh, yeah.
thank you for this. I'm sure it helps a lot of people. And Mandy, if you would hit stop recording or.
Okay, absolutely. Let me see.